Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Preaching Lad podcast. Today we have the pleasure of inviting onto the podcast Gavin Roberts from Morgan, Utah. Before we get to Gavin, as always, I have with me my trusted fellow in the lovely flat cap today, camouflage flat cap, the pastor of Wyatt Baptist Church, Adam Wayne Thomas. Adam, good to see you, my brother.
Good to see you too.
How's it going? What's going on about an hour north of Ruston?
Man, it's raining. Just a lot of rain. We needed it though. So I'm not complaining.
Has it been as yellow in El Dorado as it has been here
Oh
in
yeah.
Ruston? I mean, it was like
Oh yeah.
this weekend,
Yeah.
like all the pollen landed. I don't know what happened, but everything opened up and all of the pollen came from all of the places, and it was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So we needed something to wash it all off with.
There you go. Dynamic feedback from Adam as always. Love the color. Love the color commentary there, buddy. All right. Well, let's go ahead and bring in our guest. Maybe we get some more engagement from all the way from Morgan, Utah. And when I say all the way, I mean it because I've made that trip. I made that trip from Mississippi to driving the family van all the way out there. It took us a day and a half or whatever, but we got there. Is our brother Gavin Roberts. Gavin, good to have you on the podcast, buddy. What's going on?
Hey, I'm honored to be here, and it is not raining here. It is 50 degrees and beautiful. It is a good day to be outside.
Whatever, man. See, this is why I don't like talking to Gavin about weather or anything that's going on in Arkansas. Like he forgets. He grew up in Greenbrier. Like he forgets what we have to endure here, and he's
Yeah.
like, and then it's like, no, we don't have any bugs. Bugs. What are bugs? What are
No pollen,
mosquitoes?
no pollen ever.
What's pollen? What's any of this
Yep,
stuff? No,
that's
we
right.
we live in this paradise of 360-degree
Yeah.
mountain views, and
That's right.
oh,
And
sheesh.
sometimes of the year you could wake up, go bird hunting, then you could go snow skiing in the middle of the day, and then close your day out doing a little fly fishing.
That's right.
Like
You
literally
could.
all the things. I still haven't gone out there. I don't know why. I don't know why.
You
I'm
need
coming.
to.
But
Seriously,
coming.
you would
it's not.
I'm coming.
absolutely love it. You would
Yeah.
love it,
I'm
Adam.
coming.
It's not as a result of a lack of an invite. I know that to be true.
I know, man. And I've promised you. I've literally promised you multiple
It's
times.
true.
It's
That's
gonna
true. You
happen.
have.
It's
And
gonna
Well,
happen.
Goodwin's the only preaching lab guy to ever come out here out of all the invites, all these guys that are my friends.
Dustin's
Goodwin's the
been
only one
out
to make
there,
the
hasn't he?
trip. Dustin has. You're right. I shouldn't have said that. Dustin's been here. That's fair. You're right. We skied together. Well, he snowboarded, but we skied together a little bit. Yep.
We went out twice in 2022. The first time just Jessica and I in June or July. I think it was June of 2022. Went out and hung out with you guys, you and Chase, your brother, who's also there. And let's be clear, you're there because you guys have been church planting there in Morgan, Utah. Morgan Grace is the church plant. How long have you guys been out there church planting?
Yep. I've been here 5 years.
5 years.
And Chase is finishing up year 6.
So we got out there, I guess 4 years ago now. Holy cow, I can't believe it's been 3.5, 4 years ago. Getting close. And had a blast with you guys. The first Sunday I ever preached, the power went out in the building you guys were meeting in. So we ended up on the yard of one of your church members and had church out. I mean, open doors, and it was absolutely beautiful. I don't think anybody heard a word that I said just because it was so cool to be out there. And preached then we went back in the fall and we took the whole family. That's where we drove all the way out from Mississippi and spent some time with you. And we just so thankful for the work you guys have been able to do. Talk a little bit about that church plant and that activity and how unique it is and how important it is there in Morgan County.
We are the only evangelical church, only non-LDS church in a town of about 5,000 people. And so I think always helpful to determine, the size of an area is the school size. And so we have a county school, Morgan County School District, and our high school graduates 250 to 300 kids a class. And so you're talking about, I call that's 5A football in rural Arkansas, and so that's a big school where I'm from. And so here you're talking about, we have the only evangelical church in that town and one of two in that county, and the other in the county, if they're having a great Sunday, running 25, kind of thing. So you're talking about a county of plus or minus 14,000, depending on what the next census says, growing pretty fast. You're talking about on a great Sunday, we're running 125, 130. If there's not visitors from, somebody like you from out of town or the mission team or something, then we're running, on a great Sunday, 130-ish, 140-ish, normally, a little over 100, and then if they're running 25, let's say 30, on being positive, you're talking about 150 believers plus or minus in a county of 14,000 that are in worship. And there's some that drive over into Ogden to go to worship, but generally speaking, just an extremely lost area. I'd argue one of the most lost counties in the country, and then effectively even a lot of the world. We're sending foreign missionaries to places with a far greater population of evangelical believers than what Morgan County shows. And so it's a lot of fun, but it's really hard. Everybody, we joke about the fly fishing and the skiing and the hunting, and I like those things, but it's a different place to be a believer, and for sure to be a pastor. And there's a reason there aren't other churches here, and it's because
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard ground.
And I know it's still hard, but the beautiful thing is just watching you guys, and it's a lesson in endurance because it takes a while in a place like that to get a foothold. But then just to see kind of how God's moved, how God's brought you through so much, and God just seems to be blessing there. Like I said, I know it's not in any way
Absolutely.
easy right now, but it is y'all been a great lesson of endurance and sticking it out, and then seeing God kind of open up the spigots and bring blessings, and so y'all just been an absolute pleasure to follow and support and watch.
Well, and I will say, I promise you, it's easier now in year 5 than year 2 or 3, buddy. It's a good thing none of y'all called me for an associate job, because I'd have been like, yeah, sign me up. But yes, I agree. It definitely is. A good one. Got a lot of those phone calls of like, man, I don't know, like I'm not sure about anything right now. I think the only thing I know is that I'm not very happy. Kind of, this is hard. Kind of thing. And so yeah, I definitely, like, I would agree. As hard as it is, yes, God has been kind and gracious, and we're all definitely on a lot better, in a way better place now, sticking it out in year 5 than it was on year 2ish kind of thing.
Well, what I've always been impressed with is your guys' willingness to engage the people there in Morgan and be unashamed about who you are. And not in a kind of in your face way, but just be very clear about, hey, we're Christians and we believe ourselves to be biblical Christians. We believe the Bible. We're going to follow the Bible. You don't really do a lot of LDS type of I don't want to say bashing. That sounds too hard, but even kind of like as some other people do, and maybe in those situations, you just kind of say, "Hey, here's the true gospel. Here's the one true gospel, and we're just going to be about this, and we're going to show you by the way that we live, and by the way that we love, and by the things that we say and do that this is why we think this is the truth, and that what you're following or you've believed is not necessarily that." And I mean, it really has. I mean, it's giving you guys access to a lot of places that it's hard to believe you have access to, and it's given you a lot of, I think, faithful reputation, like Paul talks about for Christians in Romans 12. I think that's really what's been the amazing thing is you guys just being Christians and seeing the fruit of that. Would you? I mean, isn't that kind of how you guys see it?
Yeah, we know. I love Jeff Durbin's stuff. Like when I was first coming out here, listening to his stuff, with him debate LDS folks, so helpful. Learned so much listening to him, James White, guys like that who do a lot of street evangelism. Praise God for them. We're not in a big town. We're in a town where, man, people, they know who I am. They know what I drive. They know that I have a bunch of bird dogs. They know who we are. They know my wife. We're very involved in the schools. We're not a secret. When I walk in, some people know me. If I don't know them, they know me. And so we just always thought, that you could do that. And there are some that listen to this podcast that might say that we should be more bold. And I would argue that, man, we share the gospel all the time. And we
Yeah.
share the gospel all the time. And we never have to go at someone. They come to us all the time. We share the gospel weekly, a lot of weeks daily, because someone comes to us and say, hey, you guys are different. What do you think? Why is that different? What is this? And it's just easy. And my wife is a head high school softball coach here, was just texting one of her girls who is a believer, who goes to our church. And 2 of the girls were talking to her about what's different. And so
Yeah.
it's just not hard. People know us. We talk different. We're not from here. They know that. And so it's just really not as complicated as you might think. You guys are so bold, so faithful, man. We just live here, and people come to us like you can't imagine. It's truly the easiest I've ever seen it to be crazy evangelistic and not have to work that hard at it. Other than, as you said, the work is just being present, grinding, going to the park, staying engaged in the community, taking some of the pushback and those things and just in stride because people come to us. And so yes, 100%. Our strategy is love the socks off, folks. Be present, be involved in the community, fight hard to be seen as an asset, not a liability to the community. Where
Yeah.
the Morgan Grace Church is seen in a good light here, to the end that that Christianity, that the gospel is seen in a good light, and that people are willing to listen, that we can win a hearing with people who really, if they're being honest, probably wish we weren't here a lot of the days. That people that know we don't teach the same gospel, despite what the church might be saying right now. The reality is those who know it's different. And we've seen several people come to faith in Christ from the LDS church. And so their families don't necessarily love some of the things about us, but they can't deny that we're a good thing for the community. And so we fight to make that be the case.
I just think it's a perfect example of two very important things that I think a lot of Christians need to learn. And I know it gets a bad rap, because the word winsomeness has so much baggage with it, but biblically speaking, we'll say it's Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. I mean, that's what it is, like, right? That they can't deny that there's something unique about you guys. And because of that, they're not just crediting you, they're crediting the Lord. And then secondly, it is as peace as Paul tells us to as much as it pertains to us to live with peace, to live in peace with all people. And I think you guys are doing just a fantastic example of that. And that's been, and I think that's what's been rewarded is just that faithfulness in those two things. And so just extremely thankful to have you with us. But this isn't what we wanted you to talk about. I mean, we can talk about church. We can do another church planting thing, but
Amen. Yeah, let's do
this
it.
is the Preaching Lab podcast, right, Adam? The Preaching Lab podcast. So another addiction of yours besides bird hunting and football and church planting is education. You are addicted to education,
That's very
and specifically Christian education. And what I mean by that is you got your master's degree, your MDiv from Midwestern there in Kansas
mhm.
City, correct?
Yes,
And
sir.
then you said now I need to do some doctoral work because, of course, all church planters need to have doctorates, and I
That's
don't have
right.
one. I'm being sarcastic, but then you went ahead and got a doctorate from Midwestern as well, right?
New Orleans and
New
OBG.
Orleans. Okay, DTS. And then that was just a D-min. That was just one of those lower doctorates. So now
Yeah,
you've decided that
for
you need to
sure.
do a PhD,
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
right? Are you doing it or are you not doing it?
Yeah, we'll see. I'll
We'll
do
see. Oh
another
my god.
another D-min or a PhD one. I'll keep doing something for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
You have thought
So
about where this one would be?
New Orleans or Midwestern, just because of the Southeastern maybe, but one of those two most likely, just because I just connections and
he probably needs to do
know
Southeastern
people
just so
there.
you can spread the love to all the
That's right.
seminaries.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
do
yeah,
like Southeastern's
exactly.
D-min stuff. Yeah, I agree.
That's it. Okay. But in getting all this education and doing all this work, you've centered it around preaching. Like this is how you're serious about this stuff, this preaching stuff. Like all the community engagement, all the bird hunting trips, all the fun stuff. But Gavin, you're a preacher.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
what got you just so enraptured with preaching? I want to know that. I don't know that I've ever asked you that question, but what has captivated you about preaching that you've spent the last 10 years now? I mean, just kind of devoted to studying this stuff. Where'd that come from?
Honestly, from being terrible at it, probably. I started preaching. I don't know if Sean Brandon listens to this podcast or not, but I was in Northeast Arkansas, going to Arkansas State, and I was helping with a Hispanic mission. I'd spent some time with John Michael Poulin in Latin America, and I remember even in Spanish, I know he was a great preacher. And when I came back to the States, I was kind of serving as a volunteer student pastor for a Hispanic mission in Northeast Arkansas in Jonesboro up there. Sean Brandon's church, Herman Baptist in Bono, Arkansas, was the kind of sponsor church, the mother church that housed that mission. And one Saturday night, Sean Brandon called me, said, "Hey, this church called and they needed somebody to come preach. Everybody else is booked for tomorrow. It's 8:30 on Saturday night. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Well, man, yeah, I can throw something together." So I stayed up all night and put together a sermon and went and preached it. And I'm sure it was horrible, but it was good enough. They asked me to come back again. And so, man, next thing I know, Sean Brandon and I think it was Jerry Jolly, some of those guys, Mike, Book, some of those guys, they had me preaching
Yeah.
all over Northeast Arkansas, and I was
Yeah.
terrible. I smiled big and I talked fast and tried hard, but I was horrible. And I just remember listening to guys I was around preach, and I was like, okay, that guy's really good. What's he have? Okay, he went to seminary there, he went to seminary here, and just fell in love with the art of it. Jimmy Decker, when I was 15 years old, I'm Dr. Decker for any CBC kids, gave me Haddon Robinson's Biblical Preaching, and I read that book at 15. And I was trying to do it at 19 and 20, but I didn't know how to do it. And so I think just going and failing, and people would call me for, like, you go on Sunday morning, Sunday night, 3 times. That's 6 sermons. By the 6th sermon, I was out. Like that's all the bullets I had to shoot. The clip was empty. And so I just realized, man, I don't know what I'm doing. And then just started reading about it and studying it and listening to great preaching and just fell in love with what it was to me to hear great preaching and wanted to do that for other people and realizing the Bible wasn't as boring as I thought it was. Preachers weren't as weird as I thought they were. You know, just my thought was just preachers were kind of odd old men that couldn't do anything else. And that's hateful sounding. That was my perception for some of my life. And man, there's some like really cool guys that are really good dudes that communicate the word of God well. And man, the Bible is a lot more fun when you understand it and those kind of things. So that's a long rambling answer, I guess, but just failing, realizing how terrible I was, knowing I needed education and help. And the more I read, man, when I got to seminary, I was so scared to preach, like for the first 2 years of being in my master's, because I hadn't had a preaching class yet. And I saved it for last on purpose because I wanted all my New Testament, all my Old Testament, the languages and all those things to help set me up to be great in the preaching class. And even when I got in the class, I still thought I stunk and probably did. And so that's why I went and got more education. So there's
Is
your answer.
that similar? Is that similar to your story or no? I just find it. I love hearing stories of guys because you grew up again. We mentioned this, but grew up in Greenbrier, Arkansas, Bethlehem Baptist Church. There. When did you come to Christ? Tell us about you coming to Christ.
Yeah, young age. You know, I think I really was born again, 6 years old. Grew for what that looked like, and then I would say, man, God really got hold of my heart. Jimmy Decker discipled me from actually him and my brother Chase, who I work with here, Chase Roberts. When I was like 13, I remember being in church and like some serious moment, you know, time of reflection. And I'd be like trying to get Chase to quit being so serious, quit reflecting so hard, quit thinking so hard about Jesus and things and sin and try to get him just to be, like he would like wake up early to read his Bible and I'd like make fun of him. Like, what's wrong with you? And him and Jimmy were praying for me that I'd start taking God seriously. And I'd say like, man, 13 years old, my mom and dad made me go on a mission trip. And just, that's when God really, I think changed the trajectory of my life towards him. And then, you know, ups and downs throughout that. But that was, you know, I think was born again at 6, but really the sanctification sped up, we'll say, at around 13 years old.
I would say my story was somewhat opposite, is thinking I could preach. And like, I listened to my first sermon recently. My mom had a tape of it. Oh
Oof.
my gosh. But anyway, I think I felt I was a pretty good preacher up until about my junior year. I just went to CBC because that's what you did
Mm-hmm.
back then by about my junior year, I realized I'm not as good as I thought I was. And
Uh,
so I began to have that push back on. And so mine started with a lot less humility than Gavin's story.
Well, and some of
yeah.
mine
No.
may be a little bit of a insecurity. I would say it's fair. Like I think that you joke about education, but I never feel equipped, never feel prepared, and so I think part of that good one is probably sinful insecurity of just a desire, man. Like I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want that to be false humility. I think probably sinfully it can be insecurity for
Sure.
me of just like a desire, man. I need to learn more. I don't know, instead of just trusting God and doing your best. So anyway, you know, I wouldn't say it's all humility, maybe, but also I think on the sinful side it could be insecurity. That I should probably work on.
Well, I was kind of more like in the Adam camp where I had a lot of people coming up to me telling me how good I was. And then at 21, when I pastored a church and having to preach 3 times a week and do all this stuff, I didn't feel like I was as good as what other
Yeah,
people were telling me I was, and
yeah.
that I really didn't have a clue about what I was doing, and
Mhm.
everything was just imposter syndrome where you know I'm just you know faking it until I maybe would one day get a clue. But and so here it is. Did you graduate from A State? Did you get a degree there
I
from
did.
Jonesboro? Okay,
Arkansas State undergraduate in finance.
there you go. And and yet you say, would were you did you believe God had called you to ministry while you were there? How was that kind of crystallized for you?
Man, not necessarily. I knew I wanted to do ministry. Jason Allen's book, you know, Discerning Your Call to Ministry. I knew I wanted to do ministry, but I wasn't sure I was called to the ministry, if that makes sense. That I wasn't sure I was supposed to be full-time vocational. I just knew that the guys that could put the Bible together, and now what I know is biblical theology, just blew my mind. And I was well discipled by Jimmy Decker under the preaching of Martin James in the last couple of years of high school. So like solid guys that know their stuff. And man, biblical theology, I didn't even know that was the term then, but just blew my mind. Just basic hermeneutics and good biblical theology blew my mind in college. And all those guys like, oh, I got an MDiv. And I thought, man, when somebody got an MDiv, they were like John Piper. Like that's how smart they were. Like I thought, man, you get an MDiv and you were just a genius. And so I wanted to go learn how to handle the Bible well. And me and Haley got married. I graduated college in December. We got married the next July after I spent a season guiding, finishing up some snow goose and duck guiding. And I just wanted to go learn to handle the Bible well. And so I don't know that I went there thinking, man, I'm going to go get a, D-men in preaching and be a church planner. I was more, hey, I want to be able to lead my family well. And as much as a 22-year-old kid without a family knew that he wanted that. And I just
Mhm.
thought I'd be a great lay leader, a great Sunday school teacher who actually understood the Bible. And so that was probably more my heart when I went, was just, man, I want to understand how to handle the word well, lead my family well, because I don't know how to do that right now.
It's pretty incredible. Adam's got a couple guys in his church, and we've talked about this before, but he's got a couple guys in his church that were kind of did something similar. One of them was thinking more that ministry was kind of going to be their vocation and went to Southern and got a D-min. The other one kind of knew that he was probably never going to be in vocational ministry, but at least wanted to similarly go get. And I think that's incredible. If you've got the opportunity to go and to do
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, then I just think it's interesting that the Lord would put that on your heart. And yet, in God's providence, it wasn't just so that you could be a good Sunday school teacher and a better father and husband, but now he's used it in the ways that as we mentioned
Absolutely.
earlier, that you're serving the
Yeah,
Lord now. So
absolutely.
Gavin has written this article for us for the preaching lab. Let's talk about that article that we're hoping, with all of his extensive knowledge and education and just all these things, maybe he can help us out a little bit in one of the most important areas of sermon delivery, and that's introductions.
Yeah. I was a little convicted by his article, to be honest, because all the talk of the importance of the introduction, and I feel like I feel like I just don't spend enough time on the introduction, more the conclusion and the body. But I was convicted, so thank you for the kick in the gut there,
Adam, what would you say
Gavin.
your typical introduction is like when you're preaching there at Wyatt? Good morning. Now to the text.
Yeah, I mean,
What's your
I
introduction look
try
like?
Yeah, I try to provide a little context. Here's where we are in the book, and here's what happened last week. And I do, the main point. I do try to hammer home. This is the main point. I always state a clear main point, but this is I just don't get very creative with it. And I think you can get, as your article brings out, you can get a little too creative, too flowery with it. But I think I could probably use a little work there.
Well, the name of the article is Winning a Hearing, and it's about best practices in sermon introductions. And so this is kind of where we will spend the rest of the time of the interview, just kind of talking about this. And so, Adam, I know you put together a list of questions. Why don't you go ahead and start firing away for our Dr. Roberts here and see what we can kind of figure out about introductions.
Well, I figured there's 8 of the most effective marks. I figured we could just walk through the 8 of them. But I did want to start do you prepare your introduction at the beginning, after your sermon, during your sermon? Like, when do you typically really hammer down on the introduction?
I like to do it last because it's easy. I think we have to be careful. I think one thing you can do to help toe the line, if am I just trying to be funny for the sake of being funny? And do I have just a great story I want to tell? I think we've all been there. If you have a heart to be engaging, interesting when you preach the word, then it's easy to slide into that. And that's how I preached earlier days, was just, hey, I got a great story. I'll find a text to match the story, which is a terrible way to preach. Anyone I think listening to the preaching lab probably would agree with that. But what I think it helps to do it last, because then you actually know what you're introducing as you begin to study a text and work on your exposition, and you refine your big idea and all these things. Then let's introduce what we're actually going to say, not what we think we want to introduce. And so I like to wait till the end. I think certainly there are really sharp guys that would disagree. I think it can protect you and make sure your introduction sticks closely to your text and to your big idea and to the sermon itself, which hopefully is the text, if you do it last.
I love what you say in the introduction to your article. It's not a warm up, it's a doorway. I think that's a really good look at introduction. This is the doorway to my sermon. So why do you like that picture of the introduction?
Well, I think to help you understand what made me move this direction for my this is my D-Min project, doctoral project, which sounds really cool. Probably not as cool as it sounds or as intense as it sounds. But I think that, especially in Utah, most of my people have never been truly involved in church. And a lot of church planners want to say that. I get that. But genuine, you come on a Sunday and we just start looking around the room and said, hey, first generation church attenders, first generation Christians, maybe they were saved at a younger age, but have never been actively involved in church consistently until now. And they just don't care. They just don't care. Like, they have no cultural imperative that I should be still sit and listen. And you just can't imagine when we first started this thing, like, grown men would get up and go, like, get a drink or go to the bathroom like 3 times. It's like, guys, I'm preaching for 30 minutes. Just sit down and be still. That, if my grandma would have seen me do that when I was 6, she'd have spanked my behind, kind of deal. But they just don't have that. And so I think just the introduction was such a chance to help them. Like, hey, like, you need to listen to this. Like, this matters. This is important for your life. This is truth that matters for you. And so I just think that, to me, and I mentioned the article, I think it's the most important part, because I think if it flops, it's really hard to ever get people back. And I think being in kind of an unchurched, kind of a pre-Christian context is what I would say we are in, just helped me realize, man, if that introduction stinks, you just don't get a chance. It doesn't matter how great your exposition is, how great your conclusion is. If you don't hook them and you don't help them see why this matters to you tonight, why this next 30 minutes is important for your life, then nothing else matters. And so you got to get them through the door. You got to get them leaning in with their Bible open, ready to listen and seek to see what God has to say in a text.
I think it's really interesting that you phrase it this way, because just the other day, I was taking one of my kids to start sports, seasons. It started baseball season and soccer and all this. And I was taking one of my kids to one of their first practices. And the first thing I noticed was that the coach or the assistant, like, no one came to meet the parents as we're dropping off kids. Like, no one was there to kind of introduce or to say, hey, I'm the coach. I'm the one in charge here. Let me meet you. Let me get you. And I mentioned that because, I mean, there's your introduction right there. There's your opportunity to kind of set that first moment where, hey, I'm the one that's going to be teaching your kid this sport. I'm the one that's going to be engaging you. And when there's a lack of engagement, when there's a lack of really being willing to meet someone where they are, it kind of makes you doubt the whole thing. Like, does this guy really know what they're doing? Does this guy really know what's going on here? And in reading your article, that's the immediately thing that I thought of was how frustrated I was that there wasn't a coach who was willing to say, "Hey, here I am." And it's the same thing with an introduction. Hey, this is who I am. This is what this is about. This is what we're doing here. And kind of you build trust in those first moments. You're building trust with the congregation about what you're trying to do there. And I think that's really helpful to think about.
Yeah. In your first point, you say it's important that it incites interest. And in it, you say there's no other part of the sermon as important as the introduction. So it's quite the superlative. So defend that. I'm not saying you're
Yeah.
wrong, but when you say something, this is the most important part of the sermon, I want to hear see if Jason would agree with that. So defend that.
It doesn't matter if
Get
he
ready
agrees or not.
get ready to defend your doctorate, right?
It doesn't bother me from him. I ain't listening to him. That's actually in my exit interview. One of my readers, so you have you have your supervisor and then two other professors that read your work, and that was one that he said, well, that's pretty bold, and you want to be careful to, make sure you can prove things and back it up. And so, yeah, bold statement. I in my argument is just that, if you lose them in the beginning, it's hard to get them back. And I think, just like in
Mm.
relationships, first impressions are everything. People don't forget that. And so I'd say the same thing in a sermon is if they're asleep at minute 3, it doesn't matter how good minute 23 is. And so you can have the best exposition in the world, but if you are a total dud when you walk up there, and again, for me, it's different. I grant that just my people just generally, until now, I hope we've built up the reputation of, hey, they're going to give me something of value. They're going to explain this text to me. There's going to be something helpful here. Truth will be applied tonight from this text. I just think that it doesn't matter how good the back end is if the front end's not good. And I think I mentioned this in my best practices somewhere in here, but for sure in my larger report from my doctoral work, is that H.B. Charles Jr. says that a sermon's like a plane ride, and if you take off well and you land well, nobody cares what happens in the middle. And I just know from me just listening to preaching, it's true. They can kind of lose you in the heavy hard work of exposition, can kind of be taxing. But as long as they bring it back around at the end and they started well, you can connect everything. It gives it some closure and a good takeoff to, okay, I see where we're going. And maybe even if I got lost in the middle, okay, now I see how we got there. And so I just think that if you can't introduce it well, unless you just have years of equity tanked away, then even people who really love preaching, if they have no idea where you're going, no clarity of what we're about to talk about or where we're moving towards, it's hard for them to sit there and listen.
I think it's a pretty good argument. I mean, because if you
Jason probably doesn't, but I appreciate that, Adam.
but if as the introduction, you tell them what you're going to tell them. Then the body, you tell them what you're telling them. And the conclusion is you tell them what you told them. I mean, really, the introduction is your first kind of a very big synopsis of your whole sermon. So in a sense, you're kind of, in a way, the whole sermon should kind of be there if it's a good introduction. And then you're just kind of reiterating what you started with. So Jason, what's your take?
I think the argument that Gavin is making, I'm fine with. That if you're going to get people to pay attention, then you have to get them to pay attention to something at the very beginning. And if you're not introducing your sermon well, if you're not introducing the text well, if you're not explaining why it is that they do need to sit and listen, why they don't need to get up and go to the bathroom, why the next cup of coffee can wait, then this is your opportunity. And it's their opportunity as a hearer to kind of hold you to this. Hey, you said you were going to talk about
Mm-hmm.
this, and then you went off for 30 minutes and didn't never mentioned a single thing about this again. Or oh, you said you were going to explain this about the text, and you never actually explained this about the text. I think so. I'm gonna be kind to my brother, and I'm gonna say yes. I think it's important in the fact that it is setting the tone for everything you're about to say. And if you, just like those parents at the ballpark, if you don't introduce yourself and if you don't identify who you are and give me a reason to trust you and to think you know what you're doing, then it's going to take some while to build some trust. And it's better to do it up front than it is to try to do it the rest of the time. And so I'm okay with that. I'll be nice. I mean, he's more educated than I
So,
am. So
In other words, Adam, hey, he disagrees, but he's going to do
yeah,
it on a phone call later, not
yeah,
on live.
right,
that's
yeah.
Everybody
that's
can hear it
exactly
here.
right. That's exactly
So,
right.
so kind of your second point is that introduction establishes relevancy. I think you've kind of already kind of broached on the fact that that's extra important in your context, dealing with a lot of unchurched people, possibly. Would you say that's true? That that's really why you value the introduction so much, is because your people need to kind of see the relevancy and not take that for granted.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of conversations about why the Bible is even true. Like, well, why is the Bible true, not these other books, these other four authorities? And so I think just helping people have something to attach it to real life, like relevancy, application, all those things. I quote in there Greg Gilbert, Mark Dever. I love their little book called Preach. A good introduction will offer the congregation a motivation. That's lose you guys.
No, you're there.
I'm I'm
We
still
went off
we're
went off
still
my
here.
screen. Okay, good.
Yeah.
It did. Sorry, I was reading their quote. To a motivation to put their distractions on hold for a while and do the hard work of listening well to be a careful biblical sermon, the kind of sermon that will help them mature about this congregation and as individual Christians. And I think just helping people. A lot of our folks don't see preaching as. I've never received less compliments on preaching than I have in the last 5 years of my time at Morgan Grace Church. Because they have nothing to compare it to. They just don't know, which is great for humility. It's so good for your humility. They have no idea. Like they're proud. Oh, you got a doctorate. That's great. They don't have a clue what a D-min is. They don't know. They don't care. And it's such a good thing, really, to just have people that don't care. And so I think all that to say that helping them see, hey, this matters to you. Like you need to tune in and listen. I think that helping them see this is going to be something that matters in your life is a really helpful thing to help them see why they need to sit and listen and why they need to give themselves to it.
Well, I thought after the quote that you just read, you go on to say effective introductions promise listeners
Mm-hmm.
relevant information. They will receive something that matters to them if they will listen to what is being preached. And I think that is a really helpful reminder that, hey, I'm telling people that what I'm about to say is of life-changing value to them. That this is not trivial, this is
Mm-hmm.
not small, this is really, really important and really big stuff that we're talking about. And if we don't communicate that from the very beginning, then Why should they listen? I mean, because you know this. Adam knows this. Your people, they've been working all week, and Sundays, the last day before the work week starts again, and they've got a million things on their mind. And maybe their kids are driving them crazy. Maybe work's driving them crazy. Maybe their spouse is driving them crazy. And if you can't convince them that what they're about to hear has relevancy for their life, then they can just as easily check out and do something else for however long, and maybe feel like it was better time invested because they didn't have to worry about anything for the next 30 minutes or so.
Yep.
So is that
So in
genuine?
your
Is that genuine agreement, Goodwin, or is that just veiled disagreement again,
No,
like it was for
no,
the
no,
first
no, no,
one?
no, no.
Okay, I'm just checking.
So you make the point. Thirdly, the introduction it introduces the big idea, and I love what you say. And it's very simple. The congregation should not guess what the sermon is about. I mean, to me, that is. I do try to do that, even with my introduction. It isn't blown out of the water. I'm at least communicating the big idea, and I just it's just vital, right? To not have them guess what to be halfway through it is like, what is this thing about? When you should be able to say, I said right at the beginning, spoiler alert, here's what the sermon's about.
Mm-hmm. It's good.
And I would say after doing this and receiving genuinely some feedback from Cliff Johnson, Dr. Johnson was one of my expert evaluators that graded my sermons and some of my work and things. And just after listening to him and some other guys, like I think there's a little bit of there's some liberty here to be. I would argue it's just I'm passionate about clarity in preaching and vision for your church and for your life. And I think the sermon's the same way, that if we're clear about where we're going, what we're going to be talking about, there's a lot of value there. So the only thing I would push back on my own writing, introducing the big idea, if you're preaching, let's say a narrative sermon where we're going to kind of leave it more open-ended on the front, where it's not as deductive, it's more inductive. Whereas like if it's Colossians 3, 1-4, set your mind on things above. Boom, 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 boom. Hey, focus on not on earthly things, but on Jesus, whatever your big idea is, right? But it's more, inductive, point 1, point 2, point 3. It's more kind of laid out for you. Whereas something like, I think a book like Jonah, or a lot of narratives that maybe you don't give them the big idea until the end, that maybe you start with a question, but you at least give them a direction of where we're going in the sermon. So that's the pushback I had at the end of your doctoral report deal. You have to say, what would you do different if you did it again? And I would say I would critique this one a little bit to leave some room for, I would say, for like epistles. That's true, like that you want to give that big idea up front. But for maybe a more narrative text in the Gospels, or right now we're preaching through the minor prophets, maybe something like that, it's okay to maybe not have your big idea, but just at least give some direction and clarity of where you're going. And we'll talk about the question listeners to consider here in a minute.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, because
that
go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Adam.
Jason. That's a good transition to. I really like number 4. It introduces the question the listeners to consider. I love that because me and Jason have kind of talked about a former interview we did where preaching is argument, and so you're wanting the people to try to have the questions and that they're the answers that they're trying to look for. So would you say questions in the introduction is a common tool, or should every introduction include questions that they're to have on their mind?
Yeah, and look, I think you guys know this. Most of the guys listening to this podcast, man, I've read, I don't want to say hundreds, but dozens and dozens of preaching books. And man, you have really, really sharp cats that I respect, that are solid conservative scholars of the scripture and of preaching, and who would disagree on some of these. When you get to this level of things, I use the example that Dr. Cliff Johnson, and then a guy with a PhD in preaching, Dr. Kyle Walker, on my last sermon they graded. I don't remember which one, but one of them said it was the best one of the ones they graded. One of them said it was the worst. It was the exact same sermon. Two guys who are clearly like highly qualified, and knowledgeable guys. One gave me like a 1 out of 5. One gave me a 5 out of 5. And I don't think either one of them were being nice. Like they were very honest with my work, throughout the time. And so I would say there's room for nuance here. But I would argue, if I'm teaching, so we have several young men, or not young, but just younger in ministry men in our church that we're teaching how to preach right now. And I would argue, yes, because the question does so much of interest, relevancy, all those things are in that question, and it gives them something to like, okay, what am I thinking about as we're studying this text? And so if you can get on Facebook and listen to our sermons, and we're going to begin every sermon, I would say, 98% of the time with a question. If I don't have a question, I may not be real clear about what this text, maybe kind of a mess, kind of thing, maybe just a tough text or something, but we're going to try really hard. I think it gives someone something to be listening for, something they're working towards answering as the sermon progresses. So I am pretty passionate about the question, even in if you can maybe make an argument for more of a deductive or inductive sermon, then you could maybe not have the big idea, but the question I would say is
Good deal. What the next thing you kind of address is length of introduction. What's a good length? What is too short? What is too long? How do you look for that ideal length?
Yeah, it's a great, and I think this is where guys, more, we'll just say guys who are heavy on exposition, who are passionate expositors, they'll get really angry about this and push back, about, man, it's just gimmicky, and introductions are just a waste of time. Just get to the text, and I can listen to that. There's grace, and I think people can be faithful and not even do one. It's not the way I would recommend it, but I get it, and so I would say, man, it needs to be as long as it needs to be. To get it introduced and to capture attention, establish relevancy, inside interest, ask the question. I think it needs to be that long, but not any longer. What my pushback would be, my frustration is, I worked with a pastor one time, solid brother, educated guy, sharp cat, just loved the Lord, and a generally pretty good expositor. But I'll never forget, he would talk about sermon length. Oh, preach longer. And I'll never forget one Sunday, he had I timed it. I was just timing his whole sermon. I wasn't like trying to stick him on his introduction. I was 22 and I was trying to figure it out, trying to learn from the guy. And he had a 16-minute introduction for a one-liner. He basically told C.S. Lewis's whole life story to come up with a literally like a 6-word sentence. And the sermon was 45 minutes long. Man, you could have preached a really great 28-minute sermon, 30-minute sermon, but instead you preached a not very great. Man, I was exhausted by the time you got done telling. I thought it was about C.S. Lewis. I mean, it was just ridiculously disproportional. And so I would argue that I don't know that there's if you can do it in 30 seconds, do it in 30 seconds. If it needs 5 minutes, then it's 5 minutes. But I would just say, just general rule, try to keep it as tight as you can, because I do think it's the most important part, but it's not the main part. And what I mean when I say that is, like, the point of the introduction, why it's so important, is it gets us to the text, which is what's most important to what God is saying in this text. So let's not dilly-dally there. Let's get it done. Let's get on to the text and get to what we came to do. And so as long as it needs to be, but no longer.
Yeah, I think when I look back at the times where I've had introductions that went on too long, most every one of them was serving self. It
Mm,
was because I really thought this was a really entertaining story
yep.
that would get a lot of laughs.
Yep.
And so I've found that usually when I go too long, it is just because I'm not serving a text. I'm serving self. I'm wanting to please the crowd. And so that kind of helps me keep it to the minimum. Jason, what do you think?
I know. I'm just pleased to hear that Gavin said that it's not the main thing, that the text is the main thing. It's just a very important thing. So I think he's even he's trying to crawfish himself. But
No, I'm
anyway,
not either. No, I'm not. I'm saying it is see, you're reading it. You're not reading my whole argument. It is the
I
most
got you.
important part. It's
I
not it
got
is most
you.
important. It is the most important piece of the
Uh,
sermon, but it's not the most
yes.
important thing in the sermon.
There you go.
There's a
Okay.
difference
There
there,
you go.
and
No, but
I stand by
I
that.
think it's really. I think that's really helpful because I know guys, and I've done this before, where you feel like you have to have a sermon introduction, and then you have to have a textual introduction, and the next thing you know, you've gone 15 minutes and you've
Yeah, don't
not
do
said
that.
anything that's
Yeah,
really part of your sermon, and it's like, okay, well, that's not necessarily very helpful, because a lot of times when you go that long, people have either already given up on listening to you, or they don't even know when you're transitioning to talk about what you're really there to talk about, and that can become confusing. And then all of a sudden, if you're going on for 20 more minutes, I agree that by that time you're probably lost, and people are feeling like this is more work than it is enjoyable. And so I think that's very helpful. What number we got next?
Number six is connected to the sermon body and conclusion. So it can't just be a cool story, bro. It's got to be connected, man.
yeah. I think that again. I understand a lot of guys that maybe would be in the circles that the preaching lab we'll say is in, is like, oh, just humor's, you can't use it, and I get it. I sympathize with that. That we don't want to just be And I love using humor, no shame. I love using. I think if people laugh, they listen. Especially again with my background as college ministry, church planting in an unchurched area, people that really don't care. I believe in winning a hearing, so that's my bent. That's the bias I come to a sermon with. But I think that we want to be really careful. That I think it's help. Introductions are helpful in as much as they actually introduce the text. They introduce the main idea of the text. That's what when we expository preaching, we're trying to expose the meaning of the text. And certainly there are much more robust definitions, but at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. There's a lot of room for a lot of liberty for I may not preach like you and Jason, but I would hope we're all expositors, because at the heart of our sermon, we're exposing the text. The main idea of the sermon is the main idea of the text. The main idea of the text is the main idea of the sermon. And so if it's not connected to the sermon in the conclusion, then I don't know, you're not introducing it. You didn't really do what you're supposed to be doing in the introduction. And I also, when I say that, I also mean that I think it's helpful to weave that introductory illustration or whatever it is, that one liner, that quote, the historical event, whatever it is, throughout the sermon, because I think it helps run like a line through the sermon that helps people keep it on. Hey, we're going somewhere here. And I generally, for a hack for bivocational guys or just guys that we're all busy, is I will almost always return to my opening introduction in my conclusion. I think it gives the sermon, it wraps it around, it puts a bow on it. It helps them. Oh yeah, now we got back to where we started. That's what we said we were going to do. Now we've answered this question. We leave it, with some kind of cliffhanger of, hey, like, what are you going to do with this? Something like that, but more specific than that. And so I think that it helps to run it throughout the sermon because it gives you some symmetry and some direction. People don't get bored with sermons that clearly show they're progressing, that are clear and progressing. I think when people, they can't see you're moving, they can't see momentum, that's when they bail on you. And so I think that kind of bringing it back to that, remember what we said in the beginning? It's like the family, it's like baseball, it's like sausage, whatever it is, right? That you connect it back to that throughout the sermon helps give it some clarity and some direction and some movement there.
I've got this great story that happened. It's going on like 2 years now, where I got attacked and almost killed by a bantam rooster, which is basically a midget rooster. And it's a story that just brings the house down. Like when I'm in a crowd and I want to make the crowd laugh, that's what I do. I've yet to figure out how to use it in my sermon for 2 years. Now, I think that's a sign of maturity. Back in the day, I've been like, this thing's killing. I'm going to force this into the sermon. I haven't found the place yet. I'm going to find a place for it before I die. But I do think that it does take some discipline sometimes, because like, man, the story kills a normal life. And we want to try to force it into the sermon because you want to kill it and be thought clever in your sermon. And so I think that's good. You say an introduction should create tension for the listener. What kind of tension do we want to create with our introduction?
Yeah, and this is another one that when I critique when I'm not listening to Goodwin's critique, I'm critiquing myself. That I think if you're very clear and you give your big idea up front, it's a little bit harder. And so I would say this is easier in, like, say, a narrative text. Again, we're preaching through the minor prophets right now, and when you have your question listeners to consider, then there's a tension there that you want to help them. Hey, you need to listen to the end so we can resolve this tension. So I gave you this question that you don't know the answer to, that you're supposed to consider for your own life. Now you want to keep them needing more information so that they stick with you, and listen to the end. And so I would say this is harder to do if you clearly state the big idea on the front end. And so for my doctoral work, I preached a series of sermons through 1 John, and I realized pretty quick it's hard to state the big idea clearly and create tension. And so even some of the guys, the Cliff and Dr. Decker and Dr. Larry LeCue and Dr. Kyle Walker would like give me a good grade on that. I'm like, I think you're being a little gracious on that one. That I think that can be hard to do, but I think that you want to leave them needing more information, leave them looking for the solution, help bring this back around, conclude this, wrap this up for me so I can leave with this tension relieved. Just like a good Netflix show or whatever, there's something happens at the beginning. Maybe it's a scene that's from the end of the movie or show, and then it goes back 10 years earlier. And then there's this tension. Oh my gosh, there was a gun and someone was screaming and what's going to happen? Well, you're waiting the whole time. This tension I got to see what happened. How's the story end? And so I think the same thing in preaching, that you want to get people to be interested, engaged, it's relevant. I know the question I'm considering, but now, hey, I got to listen to the end so I can answer that question well.
So you
Yeah,
kind of
Adam.
close.
Adam, let me say this real quick. One of the nicest criticisms that Gavin ever gave me was I was preaching a
Gosh.
sermon and he happened to be there, and he was like, "Dude, you built tension, you did great, and then when you released it, you just kept going, and you should have shut up like 5 minutes after." He said, "Because you did fine," and so that was so I know Gavin's big on the tension thing, but I do think it's helpful, and he gave the analogy, and this has stayed with me, and I've told others too. You're blowing up a balloon, and once you
Yeah.
pop that balloon, you're done. Okay, so
Yes.
see, your introduction is you're starting that process of blowing up that balloon, and you're getting people's attention, and you're building that tension. But once you're done, once you've popped the balloon, sit down.
Shut it.
Your
Yeah.
your sermon's over, and be satisfied with that. So I think that's good advice because we're not talking about conclusions, but the whole wraparound thing, kind of tying a bow on it. You've released the tension. Now it's time to be done. And so sit down and trust that you've done what you were supposed to. I think that's really good and beneficial, especially for young guys and old guys that feel like
Absolutely.
I've got one more thing to say. Well, no,
Yes.
you said everything.
Yeah.
You're done, and be happy with that.
And I think that comes back to clarity. If you're very clear and prepared about what your plan is and what you're trying to say, then you at least help to where you're not, oh, I forgot this one more thing would be great to say. No, you had all week to decide what you were going to say. Like you already have your manuscript, you've already thought about it, and the Holy Spirit works in the pulpit. He also works in the study, and so I just think trust the Lord, trust your prep, trust that God has guided you to where He's got you in this text, and that's enough, and trust God in that.
Good deal. So you kind of close out. Your last point is to utilize effective verbal and nonverbal communication keys. Tell us a little bit more about that, and tell me, is that more important in the introduction than maybe it is in other parts of the sermon, or is it just equally important across the board?
It is. I will dogmatically say, and Jason can disagree with me. It is. Hey, how should I say this? It is the most important part of the most important part, not the most important thing of the sermon. How about that for clarity? I think it is hugely important in the introduction that I think that I'm a manuscript guy, and I would encourage all, especially younger. Maybe when I'm not calling y'all old, but you're a little bit older than me. Maybe when I'm your age, I won't be as like married to a manuscript right now. I just know I say a lot less dumb stuff that I shouldn't have said when I have a manuscript versus when I just kind of just have bullet points and go for it. And at least I had to think about it before I said it, if I say something I shouldn't have said. And so I think in the introduction, I work really hard to at least memorize kind of main points because that's when you're establishing rapport. You're saying, hey, like I'm a preacher, as Haddon Robinson says, that you must listen to. And so that's not eye contact is huge. One thing that Cliff and other guys are like, hey, you got to be confident, low and slow, let it build. That's not my natural rate of speech, not my natural tendency is to be low and slow and let it build. And so I think that yes, in the introduction, it is more important. And what I'll try to do, and what I would recommend for anyone else, is that you not as James Merritt had a class with him. He said, "Don't memorize, do familiarize." And I think that's a really great thing for introduction. That we're not so rigid with it in the whole thing that we have every word memorized, but that we have our general key points of our illustration or whatever it is, and then our question we're going to ask people to consider. Have that part. I mean, we know that well, our one line or whatever, our big idea, whatever it is. And so, yes, I think in that moment, then when you get into the setting of the book, the expositional portion of your sermon, then you can look back down, use your notes more, that kind of thing, because you've already established that rapport. You've got them, you've hooked them. They're listening. They know why this matters to me. And so I do think it matters more in that time and in the conclusion. So I think in the introduction and the conclusion, that's a great time for great eye contact, confident posture. We're not fidgeting. We're not. I didn't even know I did this. Cliff mentioned there's times when I can kind of do this number with my thumbs, and Cliff mentioned that on some of my critiques, and I was like, "What's he talking about?" Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And so just to have a confident presence again, that helps establish the relevancy. It helps establish just your competency in all these things in the introduction. So yes, I would say low and slow. I have to think about that really hard because I naturally talk very fast, and a lot of times I hope when people hear me preach, like that didn't even sound like you, in the sense that I was, lower and slower and more thoughtful of my pace of speech and rate of speech and those kind of things.
So here's how you close out your article, and then I'll let Jason close out our podcast. I just thought it was a good summary. Effective sermon introduction earns a hearing. It clarifies the destination and invites the listener to walk with you through the text. When introductions fail, sermons rarely recover. Good word, great article. I encourage everyone who's listening that hasn't already to check that article out.
All right, brother. Hey, I really do appreciate. I appreciate you using your gifts and your expertise in helping us in these areas. I'm glad to see that my big eyes and making intense contact with people is actually a good thing, and it really draws them in instead of scaring them half to death. I appreciate that part, but most importantly, dude, I just appreciate you. I love you, brother, and I'm thankful to see God continue to use you in hard places to do great things. And so we don't typically do this, but I want to pray for you and pray for what's going on in Morgan, and then we'll get out of here. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right, brother. Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you so much for Gavin, and I thank you, Father, for his dedication to your service. I pray for Haley, pray for their children. I pray, God, that you would continue to use them and bless them in the work that they're doing there in Morgan, Utah. I pray, God, for Chase and Becky and their family, Lord, in the ways that you are using them, and just pray, God, that you would continue to bless them in their efforts to make your name famous among hard reached people and among people where there aren't faithful churches. And God, we just pray that you would continue to sustain them and bless them and use them and all of their gifts for your glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Brother,
Amen.
it's been good to be with you, and thank you for taking time. And again, you know, all the help that you're giving us and giving preachers to be better at this calling, I think is incredibly valuable. And so we're thankful for that. But this is it. This is it for the Preaching Lab episode. We are blessed to be able to serve you guys. And if we can do anything else, check us out on Facebook, follow along on the podcast, like, share, subscribe, all those types of things, and help us to be able to know how we can better communicate to you and help you to be healthy pastors who are filling healthy pulpits. And we thank you guys so much. Have a great time.